Welcome to the Paleo Post podcast. I'm your host, Seth Chaggy, founder of the world of Paleoanthropology. Join us as we journey through time to uncover the secrets of human evolution. Each episode, we delve into the groundbreaking discoveries, fascinating research, and the stories of our ancient ancestors. From the latest fossil finds to in-depth discussions with leading experts, the Paleo Post podcast brings the past to life. Whether you're a seasoned researcher or just curious about where we come from, there's something here for everyone. So let's explore our incredible human origins together.
Well, guys, here we are, episode 6 of the Paleo Post podcast. It is such a pleasure to be back joining my wonderful colleagues, Genevieve von Petzinger and Dr. George Bash. We are here for an extra special spooky episode of the Paleo Post podcast for Halloween or Guy Fawkes Day, whatever we want to be celebrating. You know, there's a lot going on. We have a fun, action-packed episode for you today. We're going to be talking about Neanderthals, special genetics, special caves in Wales, spooky cave art, and the supernatural. We've got a lot going on. It's going to be a great episode. First, let's just do a quick check-in. Genevieve, how are you since we've last heard from you?
I'm great. So as you can see, I'm attempting to be in costume here, though. See, my whip, my fedora. So, gee, I wonder who I am for Halloween, huh? But yes, I figured it was appropriate. I mean, I actually do dress sometimes, not with the whole fedora, but I do sometimes wear this kind of kit when I go into schools and do outreach.
Right. Yeah,
Right?
I feel like it's so stereotypical, but it's like it is true. Like you look at the people who are in the field and like they do dress that way. Like it's
Well, we do kind of. It was really funny though. There was one time where George and I were in the field. I won't say where, but we're meeting with like the government officials there, and it was so funny because normally I just wear like jeans and a t-shirt, or depending if it's cold or hot, and then of course we're in our caving suits or whatever for in caves. But of course we were like, oh, we gotta look like real archaeologists today. So we all turned up in our khakis. Like it was like I was like, okay, everybody's got to be on point. So we were all wearing our khakis and looking very archaeological. But absolutely, I mean, actually, I had a really funny conversation once with George Lucas actually at when I was at
oh
TED.
wow.
Yeah, I was sitting with him, and we had a little chat, and because he did archaeology, of course, before he switched to filmmaking.
Mm.
And so we were having a good laugh though, because I said, you, sir, and Indiana Jones, along with Lara Croft Tomb Raider, I said, basically, you are the marketing machine for our field. Because
Right.
the reality is, I mean, we're mostly digging up garbage pits and right. And I mean, I've been on sites before, like I was on a Roman excavation where like they were digging up a latrine. Like what we do
Right.
is
Yeah.
right. Or I mean, I crawl through caves. I've crawled through more types of feces than I don't even know the name. Like, I mean, do you remember South Africa, that cute little furry thing, George, where we were crawling through the cave with all of that one's poop? I can't remember its name now, but but it's incredibly glamorous because people like Indiana Jones, right? Or Tomb Raider, or that whole vibe. And it is, I mean, it's amazing. We're exploring, we're doing such cool things. But yeah, George Lucas and I had a laugh about the fact that we have very good marketing. And that but I've seen undergrads too get to the field and realize what like a lot of slogging heavy work it is, and they're like, this doesn't feel very like Indiana Jones, does it? But no, but it's fun. So I thought it was appropriate that I should dress accordingly, and yeah, and come for Halloween. But yeah, I do sometimes wear khaki when I'm doing presentations, especially with the kids, because it's part of the vibe, right?
Right. Yep. Right. You got it. You just got it. All
Exactly.
right, George, how are you? I know
Oh,
you are a very busy man. You're a very busy archaeologist
Always
and
up to something.
always up to something. So why don't you give us a little bit of an update on what's
yes,
going
yeah,
on
yeah.
with you? Because everyone loves to know
Oh,
what's going on with you.
well, I had a meeting today with about several caves in southwest Wales, and I'll be talking about one of those a little bit later on. But I've just come back from Ireland, in fact, the west of Ireland, just north of Shannon, beautiful part of the world called the Burren. And the Burren is a limestone karst area stuffed full of, guess what, caves.
Yeah.
And on top of those, on top of the surface of this karst landscape are lots and lots of Neolithic and Bronze Age monuments. So I was in sixth heaven, not quite seventh heaven, but sixth heaven. And the conference was the conference of the Speleological Union of Ireland, along with the Irish Cave Rescue Organisation. So they amalgamated, and the theme was rock art, which I had a bit of a chuckle about because my paper was the only one about rock art. And they were talking about some really interesting stuff. I mean, there were guys there who are really impassioned cavers who will go that extra mile to survey and whatever. But again, I dare say they're looking very much down on the floor rather than looking at the sides of the walls. But that's my job, not theirs. And one of the most interesting things that I was thinking about, and you always do it when you're on the hoof. And what I mean by when you're on the hoof, when you're giving a lecture or a talk, you sometimes digress. I do a lot of digressing, and I like digressing because it just adds a bit more flavour to the lecture that I'm giving. And because I was in Ireland, if I'd have been in Wales, I'd have just carried on straight and do the straight talk about what I was talking about. I was talking about a particular cave on the Gower coast, and I looked at the maps and some very, very good mapping being done by specialists looking at the extent of the glaciation, the last glaciation, and how far south and west it went. And I've always sort of concentrated by looking at the south of Wales, but not looking west. And goodness me, I couldn't believe it, but at 19,000 before present and 18,000 before present, there was an ice-free area around Cork, so Southern Ireland, right along to the very, very western tip of Ireland. And guess what? The whole of that area is stuffed full of caves. It's limestone. But no one's ever looked for no one's ever looked for rock art. And also no one's ever really properly excavated those caves. The only person I can think of is a guy called Peter Woodman, who was a very famous Irish archaeologist. And he was really the first person, first of all, to talk about the Mesolithic in Ireland. But also, he also argued the idea that we have a very late Paleolithic sequence in Northern Ireland, around a place called Mount Sandal. And so he excavated Mount Sandal just before he died, quite a few years ago. But again, one of my heroes, very, very good excavator, knew what he was talking about, really good detailed stratigraphy, recording, which is what you expect of an archaeological site. However, when you look at the maps which show the extent of ice on around Western British Isles, including Northern Ireland, the north is not ice-free, so that tells me that what Peter Woodman was looking at was a very, very late Upper Paleolithic sequence based on radiocarbonating and also the lithic evidence as well that gives it away. And just for the listeners of this podcast, the lithics are what we could call, if I remember rightly, called an Oban type lithic, which is a classic sort of late Paleolithic lithic, which is really only found in Northern Ireland and on the west coast of Scotland. So it's again sort of as an indicative diagnostic tool. Southern Ireland at that time, at 19 and 18,000 before present, was ice-free. And when I finished my lecture on Saturday, a guy came up to me. He says, "Oh, I do a lot of caving around Cork and whatever," and he showed me some pictures of caves, and these look absolute cracking sort of potential caves to go and explore. So I'm now thinking, although I'm concentrating a lot of my sort of time in Wales, in particular on the Gower coast and around what we call Carmarthen Bay to the west, I'm also thinking about the idea of taking the offer up, which was given to me, to go over to Cork and have a look at some of the cave systems there. Because here's my one big one-liner for tonight, is that whatever you see in one cave, you're going to find in other caves as well. And this is what we're finding. You know, when the Creswell Crag stuff was discovered in 2003, the people that found it thought in their infinite wisdom that that was going to be the only cave in the British Isles where rock art was ever going to be found. Well, the thing is, my argument is that if you are deliberately looking for rock art in a cave context, for example, you'll find it. And the proof of the pudding is, we've now got rock art in the Mendips in southwest Britain, around Bristol, just south of Bristol. We've got Paleolithic rock art certainly in the Wye Valley, which is just north of the county town of Monmouth, along the southern marches of England and Wales. And we also now have rock art on the Gower coast in maybe 2 or 3 caves. So why not go further west? And remember, this is the most important point, at 19 and 18,000 before present, the so-called Bristol Channel that we have today was a land area, a very, very beautiful plateau full of mosses, lichens, sedges, grasses, dwarf willow, dwarf birch, dwarf juniper. And these would be ideal foodstuffs for mammoth, elk, reindeer, horse, bison. And guess what? This is what we've been finding in the bone caves on the Gower coast and elsewhere. So quite clearly, these areas are very, very important indeed. Now, when we go further west, and we have to thank people like Roger Jacoby for this, who passed away quite a few years ago, but he was one of the most important people, certainly within a British context, to work out, first of all, a lithic assemblage for the number of caves. He's very, very good on his lithics. But also he worked with a lot of paleoenvironmentalists, and they worked out the extent of the far western landmass that dipped into the Atlantic Ocean. And so we know that the land south of Cork, which is now water, part of the Atlantic Ocean, was actually land. So it's quite interesting to think that if you've got caves or limestone caves around the area that I've been looking at on the Gower coast, then we've more than likely got caves further westwards which is what is now we call Ireland. So that's been my sort of one sort of big thing I take away from the conference. Like I say, the conference was very interesting, and I probably will go there next year. It was nice to be invited.
George, can I jump in and bug you? I have questions.
Yeah.
I was sitting on my hands because I wanted you to finish what you were thinking. But so first of all, amazing. But doesn't it? I mean, I think the UK in general, as you said, with like the Cresswell Crags kind of being almost like the first, right? It's what started the little rock that's now starting the avalanche. So I mean, I think so often is it not our own limiting beliefs? Right? As funny as that sounds, it's us. We're like, well, it can't be there. And so therefore we don't go looking. And I mean, I think Ireland is such a beautiful example of that potentially. I love Ireland. So I'm totally going to invite myself along. That sounds fantastic. I'd love to go hang out in Ireland. I have family there. Unsurprisingly, I have some Celtic heritage. So what I was thinking, my first question, of course, I was thinking also Doggerland, the fact that this was all land at this point. Also, so for the listeners / viewers, lithics, of course, are stone tools. I'm just clarifying. I'm sure most people know that, but just, lithics is the fancy archaeology word. So kind of like I was having fun saying cryoclastic erosion the other day, which is the freeze thaw cycle. What I was thinking about though was, first of all, what is the distance? Like, what is the distance between the Gower? Is the Gower the farthest west point? Is that kind of no. So what is the closest extent between Cork and I'm trying to get a sense of distance, because I mean hunter-gatherer groups walk. Like they absolutely move between hunting grounds seasonally, they move. So I was just curious, like, is this a reasonable distance?
It is, yes. I mean, I'll say it's around about 130, 140 kilometers.
Oh, that's not bad at all. Okay.
However, we do have evidence from caves in the Wye Valley, which is an inland area of limestone where we've got Paleolithic there, where we have evidence of cowrie shells, which have been brought from the coasts of Wales, South Wales and West Wales, which is around about, I would say, between 110, 120 kilometers. So So people are quite happy either to contact and exchange items along route, or people are going from the source area, such as the Wye Valley, and traipsing on a number 9 bus all the way down to South Wales or to Central Wales coastline, where these cowrie shell outcrops occur. They're very, very unique cowrie shells, so they can only come from two places within that.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Part of Europe.
Don't you love it when it's like so easy? You're like, it must come from here. No, so I think so. There's a really high likelihood then that there was contact and people were moving between what we now see of Ireland and Wales, but would have just been part of that Doggerland. Is that what they would have called it? It was just part of that sort of.
No. We've got different. No, Doggerland's in the eastern part of the British Isles.
Is that more the Scandinavian piece, right?
That's correct.
More that side. What do you call it over on the other side?
I can't remember the name of it, but I'm going to call it Dublin Land. I'll call it Dublin Land.
Yeah. So that was my first question, though, was that. My second question was, because 19,000, so of course we're kind of talking about the last glacial maximum here a little bit, which is always interesting too, because there very much could have been, and this might be what you're starting to find, frankly, in some of the sites in the UK as well, is you might be finding another refuge area that we didn't know existed, which is very intriguing. So for the viewers, the refuge areas are, so during the LGM, or the last glacial maximum, which was what I'd say about 18,000 to 22,000 years ago.
18 to 20,000, yeah.
So that's when the ice sheets came down to their absolute maximum extent. And so they were even down into like northern France and that kind of thing. And what happens when the ice sheets drop is they push all the other environments down as well. So what, France ends up being the tundra, and then the boreal forest ends up more like so all of those things, like I always think of Canada since I'm from Canada, but we have our Arctic, we have our tundra, we have our boreal forest, like we have all those. So the same environments exist, they just get shoved further south, which is how things change and the Sahara goes green and like all that happens too. So with the LGM though, what happened was everything got really cold, but there was certain protected areas that remained a little warmer and remained really rich in animals and resources, and people congregated in those spots. And so I'm wondering if we might be in the process of starting to, like with the work that you're doing and the work that hopefully will start going on further into that whole area, whether this might be another LGM refuge area. It'd be really interesting to see.
It's more than likely, Jen. I mean, the thing you have to consider is that the area around Cork and Southern Ireland was more prone to receiving the warm waters of the Gulf Stream.
That's right, of course.
Than the Bristol Plateau rather than the Bristol Channel. And also the other thing to consider is that you're right about this idea about the idea of how things are moving northwards as it gets warmer. At that time at the LGM, at the latter part of the LGM, you're seeing grasses and dwarf shrubbery trees. But that is followed by pine. So pine is the next lot of trees coming through into southern Britain at around about another 1,000 years later. So it is a very interesting sort of sweep. And again, the changing of the vegetation also changes the fauna that you're hunting as well.
Yeah, which animals are floating around. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So in many respects, you can see why mammoth are dying out. You can see why woolly rhinos died out, around about 22,000 around the British Isles. We've still got those large, giganteous reindeers. What's it called? The giant elk.
I always say, what is it? Megalosaurus? I don't think I'm pronouncing it quite right, but that one, that one. They're huge. They were like 2.5 meters high. Exactly. Like they were like 1.5 humans high. They were big. But again, think about it. In a forest, what's going to happen with your huge antlers in a forest? You're going to get stuck, right? So that they need the open tundra. I mean, that's the same thing. There's a reason why there were reindeer in France. They were drawing reindeer on walls where reindeer normally live up in the Arctic, right? So that's the thing, is that the animals move with the environment, like everything's moving, and people were following certain herds or adapting depending if they stayed in the area, but there could be another entire like chapter of human history that's sitting over in that region that we're only just you're starting to open up, you're just starting to write that chapter right now. It's really exciting.
I'm just thinking about, I've been thinking about the idea about doing some exploratory work there, preliminary work. But again, it's the interesting thing is that, I mean, the one thing we have over archaeologists per se,
Yeah.
is that archaeologists look down, we look to our sides and up. And,
Exactly. No.
so
Especially
that's the reason
knowing
why
that it was warm too. That's really interesting as well, because that's exactly, like with any sort of survey work, I mean, you're always looking for that checklist, right? And if it was warm and therefore easier to survive the glacial maximum, there could be a concentration of habitation where it may be that was a refuge spot from which people then expanded back out as it warmed up, and as the sort of the glacier started to recede and melt. You could be onto something very interesting. That's so exciting, especially with all those
exactly.
karst formations too, with all the limestone.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm intrigued.
And also the other big problem as well, Jen and Seth, the big problem you have as well with certainly within the European context is that all the sites that have been looked at by archaeologists, say 100 years, 150 years, they have their own idea then of how old those those flint tools were. And the big problem that we have now, we're starting to now properly assess. People like Stephen Aldous Green, people like Roger Jacobi, for example, have done really excellent pieces of work. Oh, and Elizabeth Walker, I must mention her. They've done a lot of hard work in assessing the characterization of the lithics and placing them into various parts of the Upper Paleolithic and the Mesolithic, which is something which we didn't have before. So I think it's lurking somewhere in some museums down in Ireland, Southern Ireland.
Ooh.
Provincial museums. There's probably flint there, which is probably Upper Paleolithic, but it's been probably designated either as Mesolithic or Neolithic or just debitage. But clearly, we need to relook at it again. I think Peter Woodman was going on the right tracks up in Northern Ireland. We just need his brain to come over and look at Southern Ireland, but in a slightly different way.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Yeah. No, I think that's exciting. So look at you. We see it's all about it's connecting the dots, right? So my little geometric science fun. But that's awesome. Oh, I love it. Well done. New areas to explore.
So that was my sort of report on the Speleological Union of Ireland Conference Symposium, which was awesome. Again, had a lovely pint of Guinness, by the way. Well, maybe more than one, but I had a lovely Guinness down there.
You're like, I can neither confirm nor deny how many I may have had.
Yeah. And then, I mean, do you want me to carry on, Seth, with the with my sort of discovery of the week?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't we hear about it? Let's hear about it. What is your discovery of the week, George?
Again, it's still in the same. I mean, I'm probably a bit boring to your listeners and viewers, but it's in Wales again. And what's remarkable about this particular cave, it's been recently sort of rediscovered in many respects, and it's typical of all archaeological sites within Britain, in that you have the antiquarians going in there in the 18th and 19th and early 20th centuries, digging away quite happily, but they're not digging in a stratigraphic way. They're just chucking the stuff out. And we know from this one cave, this is a cave called Wogan's Cave, which is now being excavated by a colleague of mine, a guy called Rob Dinnis from the University of Aberdeen. Now, Rob started working for I think the British Museum, and he's been then working in contract archaeology, but now he works. He's now got, I think, a lectureship at the University of Aberdeen, and he's expressed an interest in doing work at Wogan Cave. And his sort of approach has been very, very interesting, because if you were to go down that cave, say 10 years ago, you'd think it's part of a castle complex, because right above it is Pembroke Castle, massive big castle, medieval, dating to the 11th, 12th century, and certainly sort of refurbished in the 13th century. And part of that refurbishment was to use a natural cave underneath the castle and build a wall against the cave entrance. And so anybody going there as an archaeologist, they would automatically think, it's part of the castle complex, which indirectly it is. However, if you take away that wall, you have there a natural cave, a very, very sort of globular, circular cave with no niches, no passages, just one big circular blob of cave in plan. And like I say, it's been excavated in the 19th century with a few lithic tools, a little bit of pottery, and some bone. I can't remember if it's animal bone or human bone, but nonetheless, it's unstratified. Anyway, Rob went down there, I think, about 4 years ago, and he's now working there on a seasonal basis. And he's just published a report in a cave research journal for I think, the second excavation season, which he's reporting on. And what's quite interesting about that is that he's now found, by excavating 3 trenches, trenches 2, 5, and 7, he's now gone down to a quite nice level and has now uncovered the Holocene levels and the levels below, which are Paleolithic, of course. And out of that, those levels is obviously a nice sequence of lithics. But also he's doing which I always want to do, but there's never the funding to do it. He's actually got somebody doing the DNA, so they're doing DNA analysis on the soils, on the stratigraphy, which is really interesting. And he's got he calls it early human occupation. Now, I take that to be late Upper Paleolithic, but I suggest that maybe it goes back a little bit further. So it's really quite interesting. He's got the classic bone material down there. He's got, I think, reindeer, woolly mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, mammoth, and horse. And it's very, very similar to, in terms of excavation. And again, I urge your listeners and viewers to Google it, Cork Camp, which was close by, and it was excavated by a guy called Jeff Wainwright, who was quite a famous archaeologist who worked for English Heritage, but in his retirement, moved to Wales. But whilst he was in it, and his career in working for English Heritage, he actually did work at Cork Camp, and he produced a very, very good report on that. So in terms of dating, he's definitely got a site which is medieval, a site which is now Mesolithic. So we're talking about an occupation of around about 11,000 years ago. And then he's got earlier stuff, which he's busiest at making the assessments on at the moment. But again, it's really quite interesting with what he's got. And the trenches he's excavated are quite small. And then what's quite interesting is that the surface of the cave is very, very flat indeed. There's no rocks to trip over, no boulders to trip over. It's very much a flat cave. It was actually used as a storage place during the medieval period for, I dare say, things like gunpowder and things like that. The late medieval, early post-medieval period used for storage. Hence the reason why you got that stone wall in front of the cave entrance. So again, really interesting stuff. I dare say that his season 3 or season 3 / season 4 will reveal more interesting archaeology. As far as I'm aware, based on the stratigraphic plans, there is very little in terms of a natural bedrock occurring. So he's going to keep on hopefully still digging down there to hopefully get to the bottom of that cave and maybe even yield Neanderthal material. I don't know, but again, it's really interesting stuff he's doing there.
Okay, so, hold on, I have to jump in.
You far away.
Has Neanderthal material ever been found in the UK?
Certainly has. Yeah. There's Cork Camp is one of them. Cork Camp is actually a Neanderthal open air camp. No Neanderthal bone, unfortunately.
Okay, but by tools they're being identified.
Yes, they're recognized by tools and obviously radiocarbon dating. So that's Cork Camp, and the most important cave of the lot, or the most important site of the lot, is Pontywydd Cave up in North Wales. Now, this is really interesting because when Neanderthals were roaming the earth, we were in an interglacial, so 120,000 odd years ago. And along comes the glaciers, and it covers the whole of the limestone area around Pontywydd up in North Wales. And then when it recedes, there's still debris around the entrance, and then it gets discovered. And the guy who did the work there was a guy called Stephen Oldhouse Green, who I've mentioned already. He was a great person for doing lithics. He did the lithics at Paviland Cave, and he's worked with people like Elizabeth Walker, who's now the head curator for prehistory, I think, at the National Museum of Wales. He suddenly passed away about 10 years ago, but he did sterling work at Paviland Cave and Pontywydd Cave. And in Pontywydd Cave, they found, wait for it, 6 teeth. which were Neanderthal.
Oh my.
Really?
That was it. So to prove that the lithics they got were of Neanderthal date, they found 60, and that's the only hominin remains attributed to Neanderthal that we've found so far. It's only a matter
Wow.
of it's only a matter of time, like people like Rob Dennis, for example,
Yeah.
who could be digging that cave. And Rob has actually excavated a place called Longhole on the Gower Coast, and has found very, very early modern human activity in there, dating to the old nation, if I remember correctly. So very, very early indeed. So we're on that cusp again of between 30 and 40,000 years ago, where we're starting to see Neanderthals saying goodbye.
So this is like very late Neanderthals, maybe kind of, so this would kind of follow that concept of them kind of getting pushed out to the margins. Is this kind of
not quite.
not so, because I mean, but I don't know if it was not like we think of it as being, I think again though, we don't know where the happening places were, do we? Like we think of it as being maybe a backwater or an edge or but it could have been a good environment. It's just that happened to be where they were as opposed to the humans. But
if you look
that's pretty late for Neanderthals, that 30 to 40,000.
Well, it is. That's yes. But the Koigen camp and Potneuth go back much earlier. We're looking at of a range of about 250,000 years.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
it's really, really early stuff. So so I think we're looking at a completely different environment. Temperatures maybe 4 degrees higher than they are today. A sea level which is higher than today. So this is where you start. This is when you start to see around the coastal fringes evidence of raised beaches, and the Channel Islands is a good example. South Wales is a good example, where we have a tidal range which is between 7 and 9 meters higher than it is today. So it just gives you an idea about the amount of water and the lack of ice that was floating around during the last interglacial.
I have more questions. So at that point, again, the UK would have been an island at that point. So this is kind of, was it, so it would have been an island, and the Neanderthals would have actually been sort of trapped, so to speak. That would have been potentially a local population that didn't actually have contact anymore with Neanderthals on the mainland necessarily.
One thing I have to take into consideration, Jen, is the issue of, and you've mentioned already, what we call isostatic uplift. So how we see the British Isles today is because of the result of isostatic uplift. And then what
is this the tipping of the continents from the weight of the glaciers? Is that what you're talking
about?
Correct. Do I get a gold star?
You do. And just for those people listening in Scotland, Ben Nevis is moving around about a few millimeters each year upwards. And one day, I dare say, if it keeps on going, it'll have a ice or a snow line which is continuous throughout the year. That's not too far off now.
Oh wow!
So, but the point is that we've got a shifting landscape or landform over the last 250,000 years, which is, as you go further back, it's difficult to map. Yes, there probably was the British Isles was probably the British Isles during that period. However, there's a thing inside me thinking there's probably also a land mass or a land bridge between the continent and the British Isles. But I can't be sure of that whilst I'm talking to you now. I'll have to look into my little book called Reconstructing Quaternary Environments by Lowen Walker, Long Run Press, 1987, to find that.
Love it. Oh my gosh. And there might be some new stuff now too. And this is also where I think maybe artificial intelligence could end up being a really good partner for these large scale sort of reconstructions. You know what I would love to?
Absolutely.
I was chatting with some colleagues of mine they are formerly with Nat Geo and now sort of doing work with lots of different folks on immersive experiences like VR and AR, so augmented reality, virtual reality. And we were talking about the potential to rebuild landscapes in virtual reality is just extraordinary. Like that, if you really want to, I would love to see it. And you can imagine for citizen scientists around the world, like the capacity to put on a headset. Can you imagine being able to watch the United Kingdom move, like the sea levels change and like animals come and it goes tundra and pine trees and we see little people come and there's Neanderthals, like, oh my gosh. Like, I think that's, to me, because we work in the field and we have enough knowledge that we get to build that picture in our head. But I think for most people, it's not necessarily sort of front and center to what they're thinking about, right? And so it would be such an amazing way to help everybody, including us, connect with our own past in a very visual way that would, I think, really help us to understand it better. So, oh, that's so exciting. No, I didn't know. I mean, I could go on and ask you a million other Neanderthal questions, but I'm going to stop because I think Seth had a Neanderthal story, which I feel like might actually segue really nicely from this if we want to talk about it.
It does. It does really well, actually, speaking
Yeah.
about isolated populations and how we
Yep.
might understand the different ways in which Neanderthals treated each other and viewed each
Yep.
other. So we're going to talk about Thoren now, that we're not talking about the king from under the mountain from Middle Earth, but a Neanderthal from, well, the Rhone Valley in France. Now, this is tucked away like a relic from an ancient, isolated tribe of Neanderthals. And just like his Tolkienian namesake, he belonged to a pretty unique clan. Thorin's population had been hanging out alone for around 50,000 years, along without mingling with any other Neanderthal or modern human population. What's wild about Thorin is that his genome tells us his group split off from the main Neanderthal population more than 100,000 years ago. So what we're talking about isolated, or when we're talking about isolated, we mean that this group kept to themselves through the Ice Age winters, genetic bottlenecks, and the ups and downs that nature threw at them. They were still able to make stone tools, make their own industries, and function as a fully independent Neanderthal society. The big question is, was their social bubble of survival strategy gone wrong, or was it something that they did in a pinch? Were there cultural variations or reason that this group of Neanderthals did not intermix with other groups of Neanderthals? Thoren's DNA gives us an upfront seat to a chapter in Neanderthal history that may have contributed to their downfall, just like their literary counterpart. Thorin is one of resilience, but also one that ends with a bittersweet farewell, as we see that Thorin is one of the last remaining of the Neanderthal populations around 42,000 years ago to around 50,000 years ago. So what this really shows is, when we think of Neanderthals, we think, okay, well, we have humans, and we have obviously hundreds of different cultures, or over our 300,000 years of existence, there's been thousands of cultures, etc. But when we think of Neanderthals, I think most people, if they've even evolved past the point of thinking they're just, quote, cavemen, we all think Neanderthals are just one big cultural group. They're all the same. Maybe they changed throughout time, but they kind of all changed the same throughout time. At least that's how, in my opinion, as a science communicator, I've seen many people view them, including researchers. But this new evidence, this new genome that we found really shows that there were actually different groups of Neanderthals, which could imply that these different groups of Neanderthals had different cultures, different ways of thinking, different outlooks on the world, different diets, different survival mechanisms. I mean, they could be just as different as Americans from Ethiopians. I mean, it could be a completely different cultural experience for these Neanderthals. And again, this could give us insights into what led to their downfall, because if we're starting to see the populations get isolated and split off, we know Neanderthals throughout their history had very low population numbers to begin with. I think maybe max it was something like there was like 10,000 at a time, something like that. I don't quote me on that, but there were not many Neanderthals at one point. Like they were not a widespread group at any one time.
Can
so
I
it's
ask?
interesting.
I have questions.
Yeah,
And
of
thoughts.
course. That's what
Yes,
we're here for.
that's what we're doing. So first of all, I was thinking, because I think you actually raised a really interesting point, which is the question as well of whether culture was playing a role in their lack of interaction, because of course that's what we're seeing from the genetics.
Right.
And so I was thinking, some people may have bumped across these terms in a anthropology course at some point, but like endogamous versus, was it exogamous? Like, so whether it's, do you go out to find mates and do you interact, or are you
Yes.
closed and in-facing. And I think that this is where I feel like maybe this is what all this genetic stuff is funny enough because it's such hard science, but I think it also opens up a lot more of the soft stuff, if you know what I mean, like questions about, did they have cultural traditions that they didn't trust outsiders and, therefore they only married in, and over time that is going to start becoming deeply problematic if you don't have a very big population base. Or did it start as, again, one of these isolated populations because of environmental change, and suddenly they're cut off and they're the only ones around, and then they get into that becomes their normal, and then they don't choose to interact with others even when they could. Like it's really interesting to almost see it as a way, I guess, to try and piece the story together about how did they end up in that situation. Those are some things that sort of floated into my brain right away.
Yeah. Absolutely. And like something that like I think about, like just thinking like if we're trying to view the world through the eyes of Neanderthal, which is of course impossible, there's no way for us to think like another species without at least having another one alive with us today to talk to, there's just no way. But with the way that even in the modern world today, we view different, I don't like using the word race because there's no biological basis for races, but different groups of people, ethnic groups, ethnicities. Yes, ethnicity. Yeah. So when you're looking at different ethnicities, people still today think, oh my gosh, that person is so different from me. They look different from me. They act different from me. They eat different from me. I'm gonna have nothing to do with them.
Yeah. Different festivals, different customs, like exactly. Everything. Yeah. Different clothes.
Right. And when I post pictures of Neanderthals on social media, I get so many comments like, oh, why are they white skinned, or why are they dark skinned? Why are they they would have varied depending on where they were. Mm-hmm. So of course there would have been variation, but it is interesting to think, how would, say, a white Neanderthal see a darker skinned Neanderthal from the Levant? Would they think, oh, here's another Neanderthal, let's break bread and make merry? Or would there be, you're different from me, I don't like you? It's really interesting. And I think we might actually be seeing that with this genetic isolation. Something caused them to go, we're not interbreeding with you, is what this shows.
Yeah, because there was other Neanderthal populations floating around
around France.
Yeah, especially I'm thinking like around the Dordogne and like La Ferracie, and like there's lots of Neanderthals. That was like a fairly, correct me if I'm wrong,
it was
a big population base there. So this seems intentional, I think, or purposeful.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is really interesting.
I think it's an interesting point to consider as well. If we look at our own world, as I think Seth has already mentioned the idea between Americans and Ethiopians, for example. But if we got populations of Neanderthals, which are at first unhindered by the advent of modern humans coming in and basically taking away what was their traditions, you're going to start to see this idea. Well, I think you've already got it anyway. But this idea of regional variation, and the first thing I'll be looking at in terms of cultural anthropology is to look at the burial evidence from places like Shanadar, for example, in Italy, in Spain, and in particular in Portugal. And I think you get some idea that yes, it's a burial, yes, it's ritual, yes, it's possibly ritual, yes, it's intentional, but what are the variations? And the variations will tell you that they're thinking in slightly different ways. It's very much like what I've been doing with my dolmen work, my Neolithic dolmen work. You start to see variations even within a short area, such as the British Isles, northern France, Belgium, Holland, the Honeybedding, and in southern Sweden. Completely, utterly different variation in architecture. So if you've got that in the Neolithic, you've certainly got it probably in burial practices in the Mesolithic. You can also say that it's happening in the Paleolithic as well, both with early modern humans and Neanderthals. So and also the other thing we probably want to think about, you've given a date of 42,000, Seth, but correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, we're moving those dates backwards for the advent of modern humans coming into Europe. And it's more than likely that the more likely that they've been there for a reason. The reason being is that it's become an enclave which is free of modern human interference.
Those annoying, pesky humans that keep popping
Yes,
up, the Homo
exactly.
sapiens that keep those annoying neighbors. They're always so
Those annoying
It's
neighbors.
like the chatty neighbor. Nobody wants. They're like, oh God,
Yeah.
it's the
Right.
humans again. Quick, pretend you don't see them.
But at some point, they interacted sexually with us.
Yeah,
Right.
that group did that group interact? Is there evidence of that group, or were they one of the ones? Because I know some groups never. There's no evidence of interbreeding with humans. Like they're not one of the population strains that's in us. Tell us more,
It
Seth. Do you
does
know?
show from my research in the article that I read that
Yeah.
they do not have modern human DNA.
Isn't that wild?
So they are one of those groups that they were completely isolated. They did not.
Yeah. So they were not. They were that neighbor who always was quiet, kept to themselves.
Yes, exactly.
Got it. But I think I'm right there with George. I was thinking, of course, as well, if there was any, because I think we do need to start talking about Neanderthal cultures and culture groups.
Yeah.
And this is
Yeah.
where I think the future is going to be starting to, now that we've recognized that they are also humans, so to speak, and that their behavior, the range of their behaviors really fits the symbolic checklist. It's fascinating to wonder too, though, like, did they all make marks of like graphic marks or art or whatever you want to call it, or did they not? Like, did some groups make graphic marks and some did not? Because now, of course, we're starting to see evidence, in certain countries of Neanderthals making art, but did Thoren's group make art? We don't know, right? And so this is where it'd be fascinating to see, or did they have any portable artifacts of some kind, like cultural artifacts? Like, is there, versus say where the other ones we got like the feathers or lots of ochre use, or again, different ochre colors. Ochre and color symbolism can be a cool way to differentiate too.
It is important to note that this DNA did come from in a cave. This was from within a dwelling that other, tools were found and other things were found. It is from a Neanderthal layer. It's not just they found a tooth somewhere or something.
Yeah.
Like
okay. So there is other, and again, I think as we start to expand though, how many individuals for whom we have their genetic signature from the Paleolithic, so from the Ice Age, I think we're going to be able to start building. It'll be fascinating to see what is the relationship then with the other genetic groups in the vicinity, right? Like, I think that this will be such a powerful tool as more work is done and more sequencing takes place, and more sites. I think eventually we'll be able to have almost like a genetic map of everybody. We'll know it all. We'll be able to be really nosy then at that point, right? We'll know everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. Well, if I might segue, because Neanderthals, I was actually thinking a little bit about it for my spooky stuff. So is it time? Can we talk about spooky stuff?
Yeah, spooky stuff.
Is it church? Okay. Well, I figured since it was Halloween almost, it's what, the 30th right now while we're filming this. So it's almost Halloween, hence the Indiana Genevieve outfit. I was thinking about, yes, George has his costume he's not allowed to wear. Please no. So what I was thinking about was, caves and spookiness, because I mean, caves are, some people are scared of caves, right? And so then I was thinking about how there is a certain type of art found in some caves, that the French originally, I think it was the French initially, who called them fantômes, well, like as in phantoms or ghosts, right? And so I thought this was really fun. That means I get to do show and tell. Remember we were talking about André Leroi-Gourhan?
Yeah.
Yes.
This is like L'Histoire de l'Art Occidental. This is with his colleagues Brigitte and Gilles Deluc. This is like literally one of the Bibles of rock art. I mean, like, seriously, I mean, I could spend hours. Like, it's literally got it's probably got like 300 sites in it, close to it, certainly 250 sites where they actually went through and document. It's amazing. Yeah. So I used this book extensively during my my master's and my PhD, when I was putting everything together. Today, though, and Seth, I've got photos as well, so I'll give them to you afterwards so you can put them up properly on screen. But for now, I'm going to come in close Those are phantoms. So those are considered to be,
Phantoms.
they've been identified as being ghosts, or ghostly individuals, by researchers at different sites. And so these are human-like, but maybe not like, but they're not well done, right? Like they're not portrait
Right.
style. They're more like, they almost look a bit more like aliens. I mean, I swear that's half the reason why people are like, there's aliens in the caves. But it's, I think the question of, I always wonder that, and this is where I'm going to start with the question of Neanderthals as well, because when a cave bear walks into a cave, it does not think, to the best of our knowledge, oh my gosh, is this spooky? Is there something hiding in here? Are there ghosts? What's happening? No, a cave bear walks into a cave and says, this looks like a good spot to hunker down for the winter. I'm going to dig a hole and I'm going to lie in it and I'm going to go to sleep. Because it does not have an imagination that works that way. It does not have the capacity to imagine worlds that do not exist. That is not a capacity of a cave bear or a cave lion or any other species that was wandering about. So the thing is, it is not a natural thing to be afraid of caves. It's not a mammalian thing. It's not a biological thing. There are lots of creatures. I mean, they might walk in and sniff to see if somebody else is there, but there's no, it's not spooky. It's not something to be scared of. It's not the unknown, right? And so I think that capacity in our own hominin line to mentally time travel, to have imaginations, perceive of things that do not exist in that concrete biological world, is one of the neat traits which gives us creativity and capacity to do all these amazing things, but it also opened the doors for us to get scared of stuff that doesn't really exist. Like, isn't that a wild thought? So I was kind of wrapping my head around that, and I was like, I wonder if Neanderthals got scared in caves, right? Because they're so close to us, and they've got, like, and so I was wondering I wonder how far back that goes. Like it would be so fascinating to wonder if, like, do chimps ever get spooked about stuff? Like, or like, do you know what I mean? Like, isn't that a weird thought when you actually start imagining?
That really makes me think. You're right.
See?
I wonder, and I think if I were to give my best guess, because cognition and imagination and all that's very interesting to me, I would assume that fear of caves would have arrived with fear of darkness, which only would have arrived with abstract thinking. Because if you can't think what is out there in the darkness to get me, you're not thinking about it, you're not afraid of it, you're not worried about it. But the second you're like, oh, what was that crack of a leaf over behind me? Is there a cave lion coming to get me? Like, as soon as you start having the ability to wonder, I think is when fear sets in. It's like a double-edged sword that we humans have. It's a gift and it's a curse. We have this amazing brain that lets us do so many amazing things.
It's like we're running the scenarios.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, as they say, like, the most intelligent people are often the most depressed people, because just the more you know and the way things work, and it's just harder.
Their brains won't shut
hard.
up.
It's harder.
But that's exactly the point. So I was like, see, personally, I had to guess. I suspect, and I think, remember a few episodes ago, we were talking about how around 600,000 we start to see this rise in complexity potentially. I wonder if it's somewhere around Erectus, like Homo erectus. That would be my guess, is that
I would think so.
Yeah, I'd say it's somewhere around there. And this really goes back to, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm terrible at horror movies. Because I am very good. I'm horrible. I get scared still. I'm like a kid. My 12-year-old son's just like, oh my gosh. Like, I'm the one who's like this. But it's because I'm very good at suspending disbelief, right? Which is that I'm very good at just believing, like being able to step into an imaginary world and being, it's real for me while I'm in it. And so I think that, again, that's that cognitive piece, that abstract thinking, as you called it. And so I think that that's where I started going, whoa, I wonder if Neanderthals ever got spooked in a cave too. That they were like, did you see something out there? Was there a movement in the dark? And then, of course, with firelight, and you've got, like, and so then when you're making artwork on the walls, of course. So that was one of my big questions, was I wonder if Neanderthals thought caves were spooky. Countering that, though, of course, is the fact that our ancestors, direct and cousinish, different lineages, they lived often at the entrances of caves. So a cave is actually their backyard, which makes it more of a known, as opposed to for us, where a cave is like a spooky unknown. If you live in it, it's just your backyard, and therefore it may not feel as unknown. So that was kind of the counter argument to a degree, as I was like, well, it might be more of a mundane thing for many of them because it's where, it's where they do the laundry, it's where the kids play. Maybe that's where the latrine is, a little further back into the dark zone. So, like we don't know that part. However, if you were burying relatives in caves, did you think there was some way that the relatives were still in that spot? Because of course, like there's so many cool ideas. And then of course we have these fantômes on the walls, which I actually thought some of them looked like owls a little bit, and which would make sense because owls are often, again, they're from the night. They've got those big eyes. They can spin their heads around. They move completely silently because of the way their feathers are. And there's reasons why owls are often seen as like spirit creatures, right? Which leads
Absolutely.
to my other fun book, the Mind in the Cave, which is such a great book too. So I was really thinking through that concept of spirits, just sort of in the spirit of, pardon me, in the spirit of Halloween, haha. But thinking through that, of course, for us, it may very early on have also been tied to spiritual practices. And so kind of like, I mean, Samhain is the, pagan holiday around Halloween. Like we call it Halloween in North America. You guys have Guy Fawkes in the UK, right, George?
Sorry, say again, sorry.
You have Guy Fawkes Day, right? Which is sort of the
Oh, Guy
first of
Fawkes, yes,
November.
yes, yeah, November
Yeah.
the 5th.
Yeah, November 5th. But yeah, so you have kind of like we have these darker holidays at this darker time of year, which is interesting from a pagan deep tradition point of view, recognizing that we all kind of keep borrowing each other's traditions and building on them. And so there's something about this time of year as well, which seems to inspire kind of, and it could be certainly in the Northern Hemisphere, this is a time where light is a lot lower. Up where I am in Canada, it gets to the point where it's getting dark at around 3:45, 4 p.m. in the afternoon, towards like Christmas time. Like it's starting to get pretty dark. So, that sense of the darkness and things are changing. And then if we have that ability to think about dark. So these were all things I was thinking about with the caves, and then also imagining things like shamanism, which I would love to have a big conversation about another day. I think that would be a fun themed podcast. But thinking about altered states of consciousness, and of caves being, portals to other realms, or that the cave walls, when you're touching it, are the membrane between you and the other worlds. That there's so much likely deep mythology around all of these things, which are probably very distinctly hominin in the way we think. Yeah. So those were all my thoughts. That was what I wanted to share, was all my thoughts on that. Yeah.
To take that a step further, I'm just thinking about the idea of, our mindset is very, very, very much sort of black and white. We think about the idea of science and religion, which are very, very separate. So all the mundane things we think are mundane, all the things we do which are special, which are sacred. And so I think there's the one thing that we need to sort of go back to, and we only need to go back about a couple of hundred years, is that everything we did within our daily lives had some form of religious meaning to it. Superstition was another thing. Myths and legends were other things as well. And we combated evil spirits, for example, in medieval churches with witches' marks, to frighten away evil spirits and witches, which I don't like using that term very much. In terms of the cave as well, I think you say that the cave was a playground and it was known. I suggest that it was probably rigidly divided into public space and private space. Now, I got into a debate with somebody at this conference, in fact, coincidentally, about this very, very question. Okay. And he was trying to tell me, well, you get rock art around the entrances as well. And he's correct, yeah. For the entrance that we see today, but not the entrances that we would have seen 20,000 years ago. Yep. And again, this is an important point. Some of the stuff that Leroy Gorin was looking at
Yeah.
Working at limestone caves with the Peshmerga is a good example, where you go straight into the cave and you sort of launch straight into where the rock art is. But the entrance we see today is not what the entrance we would have seen 20,000 years ago. Again, this is an important point.
Yeah. Here, I'm gonna, speaking of that, do you see right there? So this is Gabiu Cave. And again, Seth, I'll give you the photo of it better.
Okay.
Could we be talking about the organization? And so what I'm going to say, so for the viewers, if people are listening but not viewing, basically what it is, as you go deeper into the cave, the art gets weirder, would be my way of describing it. You see, like it's more like animals towards the entrance, which is the sort of the square at the bottom. The deeper you go, do you see how you start getting more like shamanistic characters, or again, like a weird ghostly horned creature, right? So that again, it could be, as you said, that there may be some sections of the cave were more those public and regularly frequented.
And taboo, some were taboo,
yeah, and then other parts, or may have had other sorts of other uses, or there could have even been sections of caves that were set aside for spiritual and religious practices, or that were only visited by, say, shaman or spiritual leaders, or that those were seen as, again, maybe crossover points to another realm, because that's kind of part of this, is that a lot of times, certainly with modern analogies, I mean shamans traveling into the underworld, I mean those places are often really scary. Like those places are not like, this is not like a field with like rainbows and chipmunks, like this is like a scary place where they're having to battle like spirit animals and stuff, or other like bad evil creatures, and so again, some of that could be what we're seeing reflected on the cave walls as well, of course, is these bad, scary, evil, to use that term, but like these things that are bad. Or again, there could be parts of caves that were seen to be, like somehow evil, or having a bad feeling to them, or being off limits to regular people. I think there's so many, it's such a rich area to explore, that again, Andre Louaglan looked at questions about organization and whether certain things appeared in certain parts of caves.
There's so many archaeological examples of animals being guardians to the realms. In particular Egyptology, we have some really, really good stories there.
Yeah,
and when you start to see the animals which are guarding to the kingdoms, to the realms of the dead, then you can actually sort of transport that much further back.
It probably does go further back, right? Like that's the thing.
Absolutely. We have, San rock art in South Africa that's 50,000 years old, with half man, half animal. I don't know what you call them. Figures.
Therianthropic. There's the $10 word.
Figures that are, and we've talked about this a little bit before, about how you actually use features of the cave wall to enhance the art. So for instance, like a crack in the wall can sometimes literally be a portal into another world that the shaman is going through. So if you see, like,
you're bringing the animal out of the wall,
right?
Like the animal is in the wall, and then the painting is pulling it out. So sorry to interrupt, Seth, but I just got excited.
No, well, of course, So it's very interesting. And another thing I wanted to note just briefly, I know we could talk a whole episode about altered states of consciousness. Caves are anything that deprives you of your senses is going to induce a state of altered consciousness. And now if you imagine if there's running water or dripping calcite or something in the cave, that sound is going to induce another sense of consciousness. And the deeper you go into the cave, the less light you have. Now let's say you're breathing in whatever from your oil candle, you're not seeing anything, there's dripping sound somewhere, you could hear your heartbeat. I mean, those drawings are going to get pretty strange as you get deeper into that cave.
Well, I mean, I think, George, we've done that together before. I love turning the lights out when we're deep in a cave.
Yeah.
It is the best. And just being quiet in there. I actually did it with my older son when he was 5. I had him in a cave in Spain, and I asked him if it was okay. I said, this is something I like to do. Do you mind if I turn off the light and we can just sit in here really quietly just for a minute? And he let
Mm.
me do it. And we just sat in there. And it is like, it's so relaxing. See, I like it. I find it very peaceful. And again, but it is it feels like, on the one hand, my science brain knows what a cave is geologically and biologically speaking, but
Right.
it is a very relaxing space that does feel separate from the outside world. It is the darkest you will ever experience, because
Yes.
anywhere outside, even at nighttime, there's always some ambient light from the stars or from some, like, you know what I mean? Like, there is, it's truly dark, and that sensory deprivation piece you're talking about, where, I think, but, and then of course there's pieces of caves where I've been in sites before. I'm thinking of Ashel Sahaya. George, have you ever been into the very back of Ashel Sahaya in France there? I was there in 2013.
No, I haven't.
Yeah,
No.
because they closed it off. I know it's kind of having some, but I got the privilege of going back there. And again, it's an area that's this weird flat. It's the very back, which again, we noticed the weird things there in Gabiou when I was showing you that map. It's one of those areas again, and it's got like these little stalactites that are coming up the floor. It almost feels like a religious space at the very back of the cave, and there's even like sort of a bit of a ramp up to one final area. So I've been in sites before where you can kind of be like, oh wow, this feels a little bit different here. Like, it has a bit of a different feel, or it's like they've organized the space in a different way. It doesn't feel like the kind of spot you're going to find like, debitage or sort of old animal bones thrown away. Like, it feels like more of a space that was entered maybe with
Mm.
like with purpose. What about you, George? Have you been in sites before? Hey.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking about Ruffignac as a classic example in the
Ooh,
Dordogne.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
you've got there a 2 kilometer, well, you've got a massive cave system, in fact. But the one where the rock art is, it's today you go on a train, a mining train, and go into the cave for about 1.8 kilometers. Get off, you walk 200 meters into this wonderful sort of domed area where they've got mammoth uh,
Yeah.
charcoaled onto the ceiling walls. You've got flutings as well as you move in. So all those changes of artistic sensation you're getting at Ruffignac. And what they tend to do, if you go down there as a tourist, they will turn the lights off.
Yeah. It's the
And
best.
you are left in pitch black. And it is quite a weird sensation because all your sensory perceptions go. And also your hearing becomes more and more sort of in tune about what's going on around you. Even when you hear people breathing next door to you, they don't talk, you just listen, and it's quite remarkable.
Yes.
And I suspect that this would be the sort of thing that an initiate, someone who's going into that cave for the first time, a boy or a girl, making their mark 2 kilometers in over very treacherous terrain to get into that area where the rock art is, and also knowing where that rock art is. And again, one very interesting thing I'm starting to notice, I won't mention any caves in particular, but there are interesting things where you get these very, very long passages or very, very complex passages. And at some point, probably during the Paleolithic, people have made their marks in order to guide people through to the right place, because you can easily turn off to the left or the right and go down a complete, what we would call a rabbit hole, and get completely lost. And also, and to the way that you could die down there. So the point of getting into a cave 2 kilometers long. Let's think about it. That's not in complete darkness because you've probably got a torch, but you're talking about maybe 4 or 5 hours of negotiating very, very tough terrain to get to that one place. You make your mark, and then you've got to come out. So that's maybe just, we're talking about maybe a day in that cave in order to go for that initiation from boy to girl and coming out as a man or a woman of the community. And this is again this is just one of maybe thousands of interpretations. There's an interpretation I quite like, and it was something which was talked to me about by a guy called Chris Tilley, who I've mentioned before on the podcast, who has died this year, but he had the foresight to think about the idea about initiation based on anthropology and ethnography.
I'm thinking as well, George, have you ever been in Cuya Vera?
Yes, have
Yes,
long time
okay.
ago. Yeah.
Yeah, so Coyavera for listeners and viewers, if you haven't, because the public can go into there's a front part they can go into, but they can't go into the back.
Yeah.
You know that side alcove with all of the claviforms? There's
Yes.
the red, like it's the entire, it's really magnificent. Seth, I'll give you a couple of pictures to share with people because it has an almost altar-like quality. Like if you're down at floor level, it goes up if you remember, and then there's this whole alcove, and they've decorated it with red and black claviforms,
Right.
and there's dots, but there's no animals whatsoever. It's only geometric signs. So of course this makes it extra exciting for me.
I thought as
But
much.
but I think I mean I've also had somebody point out to me who worked in North American rock art that claviform shape. So it's almost like, think about it like with a little triangle up top of the line or a little sort of bubble at the top of one end of a line, has been used to represent people in other cultures. So that's an interesting possibility. So I don't know what they were doing in there, but Cuiavera is one of the deepest sites, Seth, in Europe where you actually find art. Like there is art, I believe it's like 1.2 kilometers into the cave. So it's insane. And to get to it, so we went into the very back of the cave. The entire ceiling is collapsed. And it's huge. It's a big, okay, so for people to understand, this is one of those big cathedral-like river tunnels, right? It's a river cave. And so it had been carved out in a circular fashion by a river way back in the day. There's still a river that runs along the base of it. So you can only go in at certain times of year because it's too dangerous. There's too much river. But at some point deep in prehistory, the ceiling collapsed in the back half kilometer. It's boulders, chunks of ceiling the size of like Volkswagen bugs. Like it is huge.
Wow.
And so we climbed over it to get to the art. And it's thought that may have happened, that the folks during the Paleolithic may have also been climbing over those massive rocks to get back there. They went all the way back there. There's to the best of my knowledge, there may be more, but 3 that I got a chance to see. There was 2 horses off to one side in an alcove on a side passage. Nothing's on the main river. It's all on these side alcoves. The other side, okay, work this one out. I've mentioned this before. I think it was in my Nat Geo talk. Okay, farthest art into this site. You go all the way down. You climb over, seriously, probably 200-300 meters of climbing over boulders the size of cars. Like it is not very safe because they sometimes shift a little bit under you. Like it's one of those ones where you're like, oh, this is a fun day at the office. And there's like a river running below you, so you're like, please don't follow the river. That would be also unfortunate. So you go and you see the horses, but then on the other side, there's a narrow passage. And it spirals upwards. You have to climb up this narrow crack that spirals up and ends up at a platform, basically, that overlooks the cave floor. It's probably like 70-80 feet up. Like it's wild. It's this huge cathedral, like, and they made dots up there. 1.2 kilometers into the cave, they went all that way, climbed all that way, literally made some red dots. Like, what were they doing back there?
This is a perfect time because we're getting a little long on our episode.
I know, and we have to stop. I'll stop this right there. But it was that one blows my mind.
We have a question from the audience.
Oh, goody.
That will be perfect, I think, to finish this episode off with.
Oh, I mean, George and I could just keep going, right? So
I know.
But this is good. These are future conversation topics. Especially because I have an ethnobotanist colleague who thinks he's just identified, and I actually think it's a pretty good idea. We almost might want to have him on the show. He thinks he's identified some examples of belladonna flowers.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And it's pretty solid. I like it. I'd love to hear what you think too, George. So this might be, and he's done some fascinating work in Siberia from the Neolithic, looking at different altered states of consciousness and the use of psychotropic plants. So if we wanted to have a whole episode on that, I think it would be really fun to get my colleague. His name is Ben Potier. So that would be pretty cool to maybe have him come on and chat with us about his botany piece. But okay, there you go, Seth. Did you find your question?
So I found the question. So,
okay, tell us.
From Mr. Robert F. McDermott.
Yes.
Quote, 13 dots for a lunar calendar. 3 dots under bison means they give birth with Y symbol. Genevieve, can you maybe chat about this? If that makes
Okay.
sense to you.
Yeah. So I think a lot of this, interestingly, of course, goes back to the Bacon et al. Article that came out, was that a couple years ago now, year and a half, 2 years ago, where they made the argument that that some of the marks, if they were sort of in a sequence, could refer to the humans keeping track of the birthing cycles of different animals that they hunted, right? And so I think that's where, and that concept of keeping track of time and all that as well. So first of all, I mean, I think that's the kind of thing that, like, that's probably too long for me to really answer super well here, but it's a great question. It was Robert, right? So great question, Robert. We might even want to do a whole segment on that and really get into like Alexander Marshak. I have books. We can bring books. And because Alexander Marshak is kind of the grandfather of tracking time and seasons, and he was doing a lot of work on this in what, probably the 60s, 70s, 80s, George? Like, it feels like
Yeah,
that
he
was
was.
kind of,
Yeah. And I
I'm
would also
so
put in Franz Boas as well.
Yep. Oh, yes, of course. Yeah. And again, I mean, and Marshak was also building on earlier people too, but that sense that, tally marks and tracking time and tracking cycles. And so for sure, I think that and I think we're, what we want to be careful of is that while that might make sense in some times and places, it doesn't necessarily make sense for 30,000 years, and every single time we see a dot won't necessarily mean it's that. And I think that that's where kind of like, we use dots and lines in all sorts of contexts in the modern world, right? Like in one context, a line with a dot above it could be a, lowercase I in English. In another case, a line could be part of us counting, like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like a tally mark. In another case, I mean, lines can be all sorts of things, right? So I think what we want to do is context is going to be incredibly important to answer that question. Interestingly, I was just corresponding with Ben Bacon this week, actually, because we had a really good chat about how, with their study, obviously they ran into some of the same problems that I ran into for my master's, which was I did it all using other people's source material, and especially Abbe Bray in particular. So Abbe Bray is like the true granddaddy of kind of like, really, wouldn't you agree, George? He's one of the original
Yeah,
granddaddies.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
yeah.
But he was sometimes a bit liberal in his drawing interpretations. Like, wasn't there a couple where he almost put like saddles on horses and stuff? There was some stuff. He liked to fill some things in. So, bless him. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have all the amazing documentation we do. But on the other hand, I think sometimes there's a bit of a grain of salt's required. And so we were actually just having a chat because I'd said to Ben that, I think it would be really helpful for him to come and see some of these sites in person, because he again did all that work of compiling, which was amazing. And as I said to him too, like, I hope, I'm really impressed and excited by what you did. And I think it's absolutely worth exploring the question of whether hunting animals, tracking their birth cycles makes sense, for sure. It's just that there's different animals in different times and places, and these cycles would have changed depending on the seasons and the type of climate. Oh, speaking of animals.
Well, I'm afraid because it's nearly Halloween, I'm going to bring my prop in.
Yes, there you go. Now you've got your black cat. I love it. So, but yeah, that's what I would say though to Robert, is that I think that certainly, in some times and places, it would make really good sense that we are seeing it, that they could very well be keeping track of that. In some ways, it might be more likely to see it on portable pieces that they could carry with them. And that's certainly what Alexander Marshak looked at, was a lot of those portable pieces that had all these lines, and he was wondering if they were tracking lunar cycles or keeping track of like women giving birth as well, right? Like is there the right number of cycles for it to be like a 9 to 10 month pregnancy kind of thing. And then of course there's like the Venus of Locelle, who has 13 lines on her little horn of plenty. So, I mean, I think the idea of lunar cycles and things like that is one that does need to be explored further. It's been touched lightly. I think pattern recognition with an artificial intelligence collaborator, it could be very helpful to also try and see what are the good patterns. The big problem in some sites as well is trying to understand what goes together. Like sometimes with these big panels, you know what I mean, George, where it's complicated and messy and there's multiple periods where people came in and drew over other people's stuff. And so that's one of the other things that can be hard to tell from pictures or from drawings is, are they from the same time period? Sometimes you can get dots near each other that are actually 10,000 years apart in age. So this is that discernment piece and reconstructing the life cycle of that wall. And in many cases, it hasn't been done yet, so it's nobody's fault. But this is where, trying to get the good quality data can be a real challenge, I think, sometimes. But I definitely want to say, I think the concept of tracking, observing animals, tracking the animals. I mean, we see the analogy in modern, examples of hunter-gatherers as well. It's would you agree, George? Like, I mean, understanding your animals is pretty important if you're a hunter-gatherer.
Well, I would say to Robert, and thank you very much for the question, is that the more simpler the symbol, the more complex the narrative. Yep. And I would say that because you look at the Christian cross, for example, which is a classic example of that. And what I would also say as well, and this is an obvious sort of statement, but and we've talked about it briefly before. But if you think about the idea of us modern humans in 2024, if we look at 100 years, we're looking at 3 to 4 generations of people. If you look at what's going on in the Paleolithic with infant mortality and whatever, we're looking at maybe 5 or 6, maybe 7 generations of people over 100 years. That's an awful long time in terms of ancestry to try and conjure up and keep going a series of symbols. Just putting my black cat down. A series of symbols to have any sort of clear, definite meaning. And as you've already said, if we are looking at, say, one small segment of the Paleolithic, say 2,000 years, 3,000 years, well, that's many hundreds of generations of community who have been and gone. And as we know, over 2,000 years, even within our own time span between here and the Romans in Europe, there's an awful lot happened in terms of technology, ideology, whatever. And I think this is where we have to be really, really careful. So when people start to talk about, oh, we've got something here which is Magdalenian or it's Solutrean or whatever, we have to break it down even further in terms of the mindset because it's such a fast time period. And also, environment, climate, geography, topography, all those things have an interplay with the way we think about the world we live in. And
different culture groups too. Because sometimes there's complete replacement and they never even talk to each other. So even if they're using similar symbols, it doesn't mean it's for the same purpose. And that's kind of, again, that's that red flag we need to be a little careful of.
Yeah.
So sorry, George, didn't mean to interrupt you, but that just...
No. I just wanted to get that one-liner in about... The more simple the symbol, the more complex the narrative.
I mean, just think about emojis. I adore emojis. That's why I like using them. So the eye rolls.
It's really funny that you're talking about emojis because I'm on the beta for the iPhone where they now let you make your own emojis. Like literally, you can type in like squirrel with cowboy hat, and then it'll make your own emoji. I'm excited to play with that when this is over with. Which, speaking of ending this podcast, I know.
But Robert, thank you for the question. Keep the questions coming. It's fun. We like answering questions.
Guys, please, more questions, the better. We've been doing one question an episode, but maybe we can do a few more, just depending on how it goes.
George and I are so long-winded. I don't know. I mean, and I mean that with love, George. I'm really long-winded, so talking about myself. But I don't know how many questions we could handle.
Exactly. So we'll see. But it's a good start.
I still think it would be fun to do a live Ask Me Anything.
We should. So guys, if you're interested in us doing a live AMA, please like and subscribe. And if you learned something new in this episode, if you liked hearing George's updates, please giving us that means the world to us. It really helps us spread education, free access to our history, ancient knowledge about our ancestors. If you want to hear our next episode and be sure not to miss it, make sure you smash that subscribe button. We really all appreciate it. I'll hand it off to Genevieve and George to say their goodbyes. This is Steph signing out.
So say, well, there you go. I will say farewell and see you next time from Indiana Genevieve.
In the words of William Shakespeare, when shall we three meet again in thunder, lightning, or in rain? When the power's gone, when the hurly-burly's lost for one, that'll be ere the set of the sun. Macbeth.
Love it. So appropriate. And for this time of year too. Awesome. So there we go.
All right, guys, that was episode 6 of season 3 of the Paleopost podcast, and we will see you next time.
Bye.